You're listening to Funny Peculiar with Jeff Downs.
So, welcome to another episode of Funny Peculiar Podcast, and it's an Edinburgh special, and this year, 2018, I'm up at the festival, and there's so many wonderful acts that I get to see, but I found a brilliant guest today. I've seen him in action. And let's just start with the title of his show. It's Mr. FIZZYWIGG'S Story Factory. So I'm with the wonderful Craig Shaynak. Am I getting that right?
Yes, it's absolutely right. Craig Shaynak. And I always use my middle name too, Craig Ricci Shaynak.
It's Ricci Shaynak, which is...
Yeah. I promised my grandfather he didn't have any sons, so I would carry on the name.
But wonderful, and you've kept that going.
That's right.
And now, just for people that now you've got a Facebook account, so people and Instagram. So if they want to follow you, they can get you on.
You can find me on Facebook on just Craig Shaynak, Shaynak. Same on Instagram.
Brilliant, and we'll find. And we are in the very just to try and find. We're in the wonderful back stairwell of the gig, of the venue where, Craig, you're doing... How many shows are you doing this year?
I'm doing 3 shows a day.
3 shows a day?
Yes. I just turned 49, and I feel like I have a 22-year-old person's schedule.
That's insane.
I'm sorry, a schedule. To translate for your audience. Hello, I'm Craig. A schedule.
I won't ask you where the routes you take and if we have semicircles and stuff like that.
Exactly right.
But just to read some of the stuff that you've done, and this is on the poster, but and I was also having a look on your Facebook page. So Craig has appeared in now the Ray Donovan series, which was fantastically successful, along with Liev Schreiber. You've been in Ted 2 with Mark Wahlberg, Harsh Times with Christian Bale, The Informant with Matt Damon. You've also done voices for Night at the Museum and Happy Feet alongside Robin Williams. Perhaps you'll tell us about that. And Craig, and you've been doing shows since 1989. You've been coming to the Fringe,
yes.
And I think you were telling me I Am Google was one of your big ones, wasn't it?
That was one of the big ones. I think 2010 through 2012 I did I Am Google, both here in Edinburgh. And then when you come here from America, you call it Edinburgh. Edinburgh. And I've done Hollywood Fringe. I did Melbourne Comedy Festival. I did Adelaide Fringe. So I Am Google's been around the world.
You've taught that. So you're doing different shows. You're doing adult shows and kids shows.
Yes, I do a kids show at the Three Sisters called Mr. FIZZYWIGG'S Story Factory, which you mentioned, at 1:30. That is basically, I have a giant roulette wheel with 15 different accents and dialects that I teach the kids how to do. And then I have about 75 hats, which I hand out to the entire audience. And all the kids come on stage and do a line in a new play that we create to keep the Story Factory open. Otherwise, it will be turned into a car park.
Okay, so and I've seen the box
premise.
It's brilliant, and it does. And what's the hardest thing? And excuse the pun, take my hat off to you, because I couldn't entertain children. It's very difficult. What's the hardest thing about entertaining kids?
The hardest thing is when you have a show where you're trying to give something for each kid to do. What are the other kids going to do while they're waiting?
Yeah, right.
That's the hardest thing. But what I have found in this show, surprisingly, is the other kids are turn out to be very respectful while the other kids are learning their line and getting their accent and getting their hat. They seem to be much more patient because they want to have a turn.
Right.
And it's an interesting situation because sometimes you have to do a bit of wrangling with kids shows where you're really just stopping kids from running out of the room. But the parents, they almost become helpers because they want to see their kid perform, so they want you to get through it. But the kids have a great time. I mean, even the shyest kid will at the end want to come up, and I'll spin the wheel. It'll come up Texas, and this little kid is hello, my name is Sean. Your line is, howdy y'all, how y'all doing? And Sean goes, howdy y'all, how y'all doing? And it's genius. It's really just a big photo opportunity for the parents.
What's the hardest accent that children struggle with, and what's the easiest?
Well, the funny thing to me is the Texas and New York.
Okay.
For kids here are very hard because we have just very different vowels in the way we do consonants. So a lot of the R's are gotten rid of in kind of English and Scottish. Well, Scottish roll them, but in New York, kids, no kid wants to say, "Hey, I'm walking here."
Yeah,
They always say, "I'm walking here," and I say,
right.
"No, I'm walking here." But when they finally hit it,
Yeah.
their face lights up. It's
They
great.
got it.
They get it. Yeah, it's great.
And I think kids love copying and
Yes.
duplicating and doing accents
And conversely, they also love when you mimic them.
Right.
So when I say, "And what's your name?" He says, "My name is Peter."
Yeah.
And I go, "Is your name Peter?"
Yeah, right.
And the whole audience laughs.
And what's the hardest accent for you to do? Because you've got this thing where it's a multitude of accents.
Well, I love to do Scottish accents,
Yeah.
but you have to be kind of brave because you're doing it in Scotland. So I'm like, "All right then, I'll tell you to do like this old fella. Sounds like Sean Connery, right then." And people always laugh, and because no one thinks they have an accent.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I have a great story. My mum
Yeah.
came here to the Fringe in 2007, and she's from New York. I'm from New York.
Yeah.
She had a kind of thicker accent than even she thought she had. So she got in the cab. I got in the cab with her. Cab driver said, "Right then, what are you off to?" And my mother said, "Is he talking English? Is he talking Scottish?" I said, "No, Mom, he's speaking English." She said, "124 Lauriston Place." And the cab driver says, "Right then, is she speaking English?" So I had to translate from Brooklyn, New York, Long Island English to Scottish English.
So you were this weird
I'm
interpreter.
this weird interpreter, yeah. I always wanted to work at the UN, and that was my day, yeah.
And so you're from New York originally. Which part of New York?
I'm originally from an area called Tuckahoe, which is near the Bronx, but then we moved out to Long Island when I was 7. And Long Island is known for being, a lot of Italians. It's half Italian, half Jewish.
Right. Because have you got Italian with
the Ricci.
The Ricci is and you do a show. You were telling me about The Godfather, and you're scaring people. You're having people walk out your shows because they actually think you're this Italian hitman.
Yes, I did my first show last night, and I really stayed in character. You do character comedy, so you know when you do character comedy, you want to stay in character, but if you overdo it, especially as an American coming here, it's very easy to think he's just a mob guy or he's just a Texas redneck. I think I have to give a little wink and nod and let people know that it's just a put on. Because I would say, "Hey, I'd like to thank the people of Edinburgh for coming out. Edinburgh is my favorite part of London." You know, I sound completely stupid, but people really think that that's just a normal American off the street, and that's not unfair, frankly, because a lot of Americans don't know geography or history and that kind of thing.
It is an education, isn't it, when they come over here and they can... Well, it's good that I suppose they say that X amount of Americans don't have passports, but...
Only 20% of Americans have passports.
20%?
Only 20%. That's roughly the number over the last 20 years. But over 50% have guns. And that's true.
That's true.
That's true. So I'd be more likely an American to have a gun than a passport, that's a little scary. I, however, I'm a weirdo because I studied medieval drama at the University of Chicago. Yes. So
let's go back to the young Craig. So when you were at school, when did the acting bug get you? What happened?
I had what you would call I was extremely shy when I was young.
I can't believe it.
I lost my top 4 teeth when I was prematurely, so I spoke with a very aggravated lisp. So I was very shy, and but I was also a good reader, so they always got me to be the narrator of the school play. But I never wanted to be in the play.
Yeah.
It was my mother, who was kind of a stage mother, who knew that I was kind of into science, who pushed me. So when I was 7 years old, I was kind of forced into the play, and I played Geppetto in Pinocchio.
Wow.
But even then, I wanted to do the accent.
Yeah.
So I asked my grandfather Ricci to teach me how to do the Italian accent. So I was like, I think I'm going to call him a Pinocchio. and this backfired a little bit because the entire audience laughed at what a great performance from a 7-year-old. Problem was, I thought they were laughing at me, and I started crying. Oh. But it actually made the play better because I, "Oh, Pinocchio, if you could be just the real boy." So that was my earliest stage experience with accents.
And did you then go on to? I mean, this is for a lot of actors.
Sure.
Drama school seems to be the.
Well, it's interesting because normally the course would be when you get into your secondary or high school, as we call, you're the star of the school play, and I actually was not in my senior play because I had mononucleosis. Does anyone know what that is?
I don't know.
It's like it's a thing you get. They used to call it the kissing disease. I guess where you just get this kind of virus and you're very tired all the time.
Okay.
And so my entire senior year, I was not in the school play. But when I got to university, I went to University of Chicago. I started doing musicals. I did the college improv troupe called Off Campus.
Okay.
In fact, it was with Off Campus I did my first Edinburgh Fringe in 1989.
1989.
Yeah.
And improv's massive in America, isn't
Yes.
it? It's a
Yes.
big. It's huge, and Canada as well. It's huge.
Yes. In Toronto and Chicago, and specifically because Second City was born there. And
for people that don't know, Second City. Just explain that. That's a.
Second City is kind of an offshoot of actually University of Chicago students. Elaine May, Mike Nichols, Paul Sills. They formed an improv group that also wrote sketches based on improvisation. And all based on games by Viola Spolin, who is a teacher of improv. And Bernie Salins, who is a University of Chicago student, started this group called Second City. And Second City was an improv sketch show that's still going to this day. Big names come out of it like Tina Fey. That's where Second City is known for. Bernie Salins also founded our college comedy troupe called Off Campus.
Okay.
Because he wanted to teach a new generation, and that's been going for about 30 years now.
Wow.
And so.
And that's where you kind of.
That's where I cut my teeth doing
doing that.
And there's some famous people actually came out of that group. David Auburn, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright for Proof, he was in my group. Sarah Koenig, who does the NPR podcast Serial.
Okay.
She was in my group.
Oh, was she?
Jeremy Carrican, who just wrote a play. It's going to be on Broadway in September.
And those days when you were doing improv,
Yeah.
what was the hardest bit about learning improv? What was the tough bit for you?
The toughest bit is not to try to steer the direction in a certain way. It's to actually just react to whatever the last thing that was said. There are a lot of rules of improv, and if you really know them inherently, it helps to, like for example, one of the rules is raise the stakes. Never let things lie the way they are. Always make it more important. Change the stage picture. Always agree with your partner, and then add information. The yes and, the famous yes and. Keeping all those things going though while you're in front of an audience is a lot different than just speaking about it.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
What was your favourite game that you would play?
I used to like to play a game. Well, there's a very long form game called The Herald, which was championed by Del Close, who was another famous improviser. It's a long form improv game where you have 6 people. Each one does a monologue based on a topic from the audience. Then they pair up. They each do scene A, B, and C. And then they pair up again and they do, scene A, part 2.
Yeah,
but then maybe a character from the other one joins in. And then by the end, they're all interweaving. That is a very long form game. It's called The Herald.
Okay, I've not. That's
It's in Chicago. It's famous because it's not meant for laughs. It's actually meant to teach the rules of improv in a long form. It can be an hour and a half show. And
so these performances can be dramatic, not just comedic.
Yes, and they always end up having some comedy because you're reacting to people just as you do in real life in conversation, but you can have a very dramatic storyline overlapping with a very funny storyline in The Herald. That's what I love about it.
And so you learned sort of dramatic and comedic, so it sort of trained you up, and then you went into the acting world. And what was your route?
I never thought I would be an actor. I always thought I would do more kind of writing, legal kind of thing. I always thought that when I got to university, but very quickly after I joined the comedy troupe, actually there was a couple people in the comedy troupe. A guy named Greg Kotis who wrote a musical called Urinetown.
Okay.
With another guy named Mark Holman who wrote the music. They were University of Chicago students, and they got me to realize, wait a minute, I think I could do this. improvising as a legitimate, it's its own form, and then also writing shows based on improv.
Yeah.
They used to have a show with another guy named Bob Fisher and Johnny Hildreth on the south side of Chicago, and it was called Avon Garfield. And they were the best improvisers I've ever seen, and that inspired me. I thought, I could do this for a living.
You can do it.
I used to sit in with them once in a while. They're very nice to me, kind of looking out for the next generation. And that's probably why I still do Edinburgh today, because I love the vibe of it.
And what was the first show you wrote then?
The first show I wrote, obviously it was the 1989 Edinburgh show. We all wrote that.
Okay.
The first solo show I wrote was a show called Cowboys and Indians, which I brought to Fringe in 2005.
Okay. And this was a kid show, or no? It's an adult show.
An adult show.
Okay.
I basically decided I would take all of the stupid quotes from George W. Bush
Right.
and marry them to the actual United States Border Patrol training guide. And my goal would be, I came here dressed as a security Border Patrol agent,
Right.
recruiting people to keep the illegal Mexicans out of Edinburgh. I said, your border relations with Mexico must be amazing. I don't know how you do it. So I went around the streets saying, come help me keep the illegal Mexicans out of Edinburgh. And people would come every night to the counting house. And that show, I was very proud of that show because I incorporated the George W. Bush quotes, but I also was making fun of policy. And that was kind of a...
And how scripted was that show? And was it a part improvised, part scripted, and you were using your training?
Well, that show was, it had set bits. It was very scripted. But I also would do a thing before the show where I would frisk everybody before they got into the venue, like you're in an airport.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'd say, excuse me, is that liquid? And then have a pint, and I'd down the whole pint. And I go, yeah, that was liquid, you can take that in, but there'd be no liquid left. And I'd say, excuse me, is that dangerous reading material? And it would be the Fringe guide. That's not allowed in the venue. I said, do you have any weapons of mass destruction? You know, and because we've been looking for those. And the frisking became a 20-minute bit outside in the hallway.
Before it
even started. So I actually did that show in France, actually, in Avignon.
Really?
In French.
No way.
In 2008. Well, what I thought was French. Let's put it this, I had not studied French in over 20 years, and I saw Eddie Izzard do his show in French. I said, I'm very challenged by other people. I said, wait a minute, I like French. If he can do, I can do that show in French. And I was the only American to do a show in French.
Wow.
And I got a cartoon in the paper.
Oh, brilliant.
And the guy drew, I'm very large. I don't know how large you can get on this podcast, but I'm the largest person you've had on this podcast.
You probably are, but hey.
Literally. I'm 400, I don't know how many stone, 25 stone or 28 stone. 3,000 stone.
Hey, we got room on the podcast. Audio
that's a good neighborhood.
We're all right.
So I would walk around Avignon and I would recruit people to help guard the border.
No way.
And I discovered in the south of France, side note, they actually have a little southern twang in the south of France. I didn't know that. Parisians would say le main or demain, but in the south of France they say le main. Demain. So I used to joke and I said, in French, I would say, you have a Mexican accent here. That people would laugh.
Because Eddie Izzard, when he first did his first French show, it was a bit of a disaster. He thought he could just do it.
Well, I found out the hard way that...
How difficult was it?
The first 3 days, I was still looking up idioms. I had 15 books with me. My bag had one outfit and 15 French books. And I was on the plane. A woman from Belgium was trying to help me. All my idiomatic expressions were wrong. But here's what I did after the show. It made me fearless as a performer.
It must have just after that.
After that, if nothing's going well on stage, and I'm speaking English, in Scotland, at least I can joke about it. So I actually invited the audience to come with me to the bar in the hotel and help correct my grammar. I put the script on the bar, and I had red pens, and the audience helped me rewrite the show.
Wonderful. Because I think the French, if you sort of attempt the language at least, have a go, they'll applaud you for that.
Well, not to stereotype, the people from Avignon itself were lovely.
Yeah.
The people who came in from Belgium were the most forgiving and the most helpful.
Okay.
And the people from Paris just looked at me like, what are you doing here? Why would you try to do this travesty?
Well, apparently, even the French don't like Parisians. They just
they were very snooty, and I didn't want it to be true, but it was somewhat
They
true.
are quite.
But whenever I would make jokes, in Avignon, I'd say, "Oh, ce pont là, c'est pas fini. That bridge is not finished. How long does it take you people to build a bridge?" And I said, "In America, we would have finished that bridge."
Yeah.
And the Parisians would go, "That is not funny. You realize the bridge collapsed in the 11th century." And I would say, "C'est un blague, c'est une blague. It's a joke. This is a comedy show." But when I did the frisking bit in France, no one had ever seen anything like that.
Wow.
That was funny. I would say things like, "Shooters on the roof don't shoot their men. Le tireur sur le toit, le tireur, ne tirez pas, ce sont mes amis. Don't shoot, they're my friends." And they would laugh because they'd look up looking for people with guns. That was fun.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, but I always loved languages, and I studied French, I studied Russian, a little Arabic, a little Japanese. I love languages, so I incorporate them into my shows as much as possible.
And you do have this wheel that takes you around the world of accents.
Yeah,
so you are
the kids come with me. Even in my late show, I do break character, and I start talking about Scottish accent versus British accents versus Indian accents. I love talking about accents. So I think I'm going to get to that sooner in my late night show.
There could be a show there.
Yeah, I think
so let's talk, because you've done so much sort of film and TV work as well,
sure.
and that's and is that quite a hard thing to break? And how did Ray Donovan come around?
It's funny because I'm heavy. I usually go out for the roles that don't have many lines. They're usually like the bouncer, the guy at the bar. But I've done Shakespeare. I did Middle English for my degree. I'm kind of a trained actor.
Sorry, when you say you did Middle English, you looked at sort of medieval England, a particular period in time?
Yes, yeah. I would take the pageant plays.
Okay.
And I actually did 2 of them in Middle English for my bachelor's.
I don't even know about these.
So, like, for example, there's a play called The Second Shepherd's Play. It's a famous medieval play.
Wow, okay.
Well, famous in the Middle Ages. And it's the pageant play where the 3 shepherds go and come to the little baby Jesus.
Okay, right.
And the language, it sounds very northern, actually.
Yeah.
Lord, what these weathers are cold, and the will happen. In mere hand of dolls along the happen. It is not as he wold, for I am all lapid in sorrow.
Okay,
Yes,
so it sounds like Game of Thrones, but for the medieval.
Exactly, that's right. I majored in Game of Thrones. I used to tell people when I did stand-up that I majored in Dungeons and Dragons, and that my grades were dependent on the roll of a 20-sided die. But because I do accents and dialects, I go out on a lot more auditions.
Right.
Because I go out for Russians, Ukrainians, Armenians, Italians.
And a director, I take it, will want that accent, and there's no messing. It's like you've got to be able to hit that.
And what's great about Hollywood is they can say, my agent can call. This is what my agent Carol will say. Do you speak Czech? And I say no. Can you by 3:00 today? I said yeah. So I was on a show called Alias, and not only did I speak Czech, but I had to teach all the other actors how to speak Czech.
Wow.
I was the official. That was a J.J. Abrams production, and I remember I get a letter from J.J. Abrams saying, "I want to thank you so much for helping the other cast with their Czech."
Really?
And I had never studied Czech, but you can get away with a lot in Hollywood, So
and that's good. And is that common that you'll get a letter from the director?
No, that was extremely nice. That was very odd, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's successful is that he's very appreciative of the people who work with him, and why he's gone. I mean, hey, when you're doing Star Trek and Star Wars, even if people don't all agree, you have to be nice to somebody.
Yeah, I know. And he's getting the gigs, isn't he?
Exactly.
And what about and your experience, say, with who's the sort of nicest person you've worked with? Say that we've rattled off Matt Damon and Robbie,
Matt Damon.
and he's a lovely guy.
Matt Damon. I only had a couple of scenes with him in this movie called The Informant, which very few people. Every time I'm in a movie with a star, that's the one that no one sees. But Matt Damon was hands down, and Steven Soderbergh, the director, were the funniest, most easygoing. We joked around all day. Matt Damon would say, "Hey, listen, Craig, why don't you walk up to the camera and just make a funny face, and then I'll walk up to the camera and make a funny face." So I said, "Okay, let's do it." So I'd walk up to the camera and I made a funny face. And then Matt Damon would go, what's this guy doing? What is he doing? And Soderbergh would go, I guess we can't use this shot. Craig, you're out of the movie. And then, what's going on? And they were joking around. It was great. It was really fun. I actually had a good time. Christian Bale in a movie called Harsh Times, again, which was directed by David Ayer, written and directed by David Ayer, who did Training Day.
Right. Okay,
He directed End of Watch. He directed Suicide Squad, although I think End of Watch is much better. Anyway, Christian Bale, he loves accents and things like that. But he has an amazing memory. I taught him a phrase in Korean 3 months before production, and he remembered it when they were doing it in production.
You taught him a phrase in Korean?
Yeah, because he was one of these kind of street smart guys in Los Angeles, and he had to speak a little Korean. He spoke Spanish.
But you've learned Korean.
Well, I looked it up.
Right.
But I mean, anyway, so I love languages, so I taught him this phrase. 3 months later, I said, hey, do you need me to remind you about that phrase? He said, no, I got it. Whoa, it's crazy.
That again, it's a real boost when you can turn up with multi-skills like this.
Yeah, I think what's put me over the edge and given me any semblance of a career is being able to do the accents and languages has helped me, because there are a lot of people who are very shy about it. They don't feel confident about it. What I've learned is, I think my worst accent's Australian.
Right.
I think it's terrible. In fact, my Australian friends confirm that it's terrible. But in America, the worst Australian accent, if you can also act.
Yeah.
Because there's maybe somebody from Australia who's not as seasoned an actor, but they would rather have the worst accent than the better actor.
There's a really weird, you say that, there's a really weird bit in, I think it's one of the Tarantino movies, The Hateful Eight.
Yes.
And Tarantino turns up in it as a cowboy, as an Australian, with a terrible accent. And it's like, what? And I'm looking around at friends going, what is he doing? Why is he even attempting?
He knows that, yes, worldwide, people are going to judge it. In America, they don't care. They look, 20% have passports. Their only exposure to Australian is the restaurant Outback Steakhouse.
Right, okay.
Hi, good eye. Here we are. Yeah, big. Good eye, mate. I mean, I do that, and they say, Craig, you're so good at accents. That sounded just like New Zealand, my favorite part of Ireland.
And you...
I'm not kidding.
No way.
People don't know geography. All right. I love my agent and manager to death, okay? Judy Orbach. She's the niece of Jerry Orbach, famous actor and musical guy in New York. She's been my agent for like 20 years, my manager for 20 years. And she always says, when you go off to Ireland this summer, I hope you have a good time. I was like, no, it's Scotland. Yeah. Edinburgh is in Scotland. She goes, it's my favorite part of London. and it's just, I mean, think of America, how big it is.
Yeah.
People don't know where anything is in America. It's just the way it is.
And also you did Night at the Museums. You do voices.
Oh, I do voices, yeah.
So that's your other big. So what's it like when you? And I've seen it when you see the actor in the booth having to got a big microphone.
Yeah.
What's the pressure like there? Getting the.
Well, specifically for Happy Feet and Night at the Museum, there's two different things. There's what they call background voices, which is kind of easy, where you just do what they call walla walla, where you're just doing background talk. But then there's voice covering, and I voice covered Robin Williams a couple of times, which means he'll come in and give you an outlay of what he's done, or you'll hear what he's done, but then he can't be in the studio, so you have to match him. You have to be him.
So you are. So you're copying what he's saying.
So,
you're doing an impression of him.
You hear the Mexican penguins in Happy Feet. Some of that's me.
Really?
Yeah, because what happens is, he can't always get into the studio to fill in things that are not quite right. So
it's like body doubling, but with voices.
Yeah, except for the fact that, with exactly.
Look, at my mate did Voldemort in the Harry Potters.
Oh, okay.
And he was the body double for... here we go. Quiz question.
Yeah.
No, it's always good. It's one of the Fiennes, Ralph Fiennes, I think.
Yeah.
And he said that Ralph Fiennes couldn't be there all day. So when he watches the films back and he sees a bald
Sometimes
head, it's him.
Yeah,
so
right.
now, do you get credited on the film titles?
Yeah, for Happy Feet Night Museum, I did because you wouldn't normally for background voices. Sometimes there's a very famous what they call loop group in Hollywood, run by a woman, Barbara Harris. She's been doing it for 30 years. Sometimes her people will get credited because they're very well known, but there are other loop groups in LA and in Burbank and other areas. But if you're doing voice matching, you usually get. You'll get some.
I didn't know that existed.
That's it's a whole.
There's a whole
thing,
industry.
Yeah. I mean, I like to do. I like to do commercials, but I've done voice matching for other commercials. You're like, hey, Shrek, what's the matter, Shrek? Why you don't love me? Oh, donkey, you're a very annoying donkey. Where for the commercials, they don't. It's not the real people.
Okay.
They get voice matching.
And which one's your favourite when you do your voice? If you're doing a character, which one do you
all
love?
All right. First, well, I love doing Scottish accents. Right then, all that screeching, all that. I like to do that because I come here sometimes. I fake people out.
Yeah.
And they go, well, you're not from here, but I know. Where are you from? You're from Falkirk? No, not from Falkirk. I'm from Los Angeles, dude. From the Bronx, baby. So I love that one, but I love doing Indian accents, and it is so. In the last few years, it's gotten very non-PC.
Yeah.
So even in the kids show, I say, look, I'm not Meryl Streep. I'm not a super voice person, but some of my voices they're for fun.
Yeah.
And they may come across as very stereotypical, but it's a kids show.
It's a kids show.
And so I go, but I also work in computers. When I don't do acting, I've done a lot of programming back in the day. And so I used to work with a lot of people who had a very thick accent. Oh, buddy, what am I telling you? This is not a proper... My joke is that an Indian accent, a Welsh accent can sound like an Indian accent with the word boyo thrown in. So that is not a proper way to do it, boyo. In a different part of the world now. But I love Indian accents, especially when I do a show and there are Indian or Pakistani people or Asian people, and sometimes they'll come up to me and she'll go, oh, that was very good what you did. You sound exactly like my cousin.
Really? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
But people don't hear their own accent.
Yeah.
And it's only when they hear it done badly that they go, oh, that's crap.
And I love America, the Americana and the films. Now, New York, that's the classic for accents.
Yeah.
Just give us a quick trip through New York, because there's lots of different, because you've got the Bronx, you've got that's kind of a very hard, and then you have posh New York.
Yeah.
Just take us through.
Yeah, so, I mean, you have Long Island's. Oh my God, I was out there talking to my daughter the other day. We're going to walk the dog, get a cup of coffee. Yeah. That's very Long Island.
Okay. And Long Island is?
Long Island is east of New York.
Okay.
That's the big thing, looks like a fish to the east of New York. And that's like with the suburbs. Then you'd have kind of, in New York, in Manhattan itself, people are trying to sound very erudite.
Right.
But they still have that New York accent.
Okay.
So they're trying to say that I just can't understand why people don't give way when I'm walking down the street. So they still have the accent, but they're trying to use.
They're
better,
almost trying to be British.
Yes, you're almost trying to be posh, right?
Yeah, right.
And then you have, then you got Brooklyn, which is like, hey, break your legs. Freaking guy comes up to me, busting my chops about what? About what? I didn't say hello. This guy,
And if we've seen.
Any mob movie, they're kind of doing like a Brooklyn thing.
Yeah.
Now Bronx, you get a little bit more like a little more nasal. Sometimes Bronx, because you have like a mixture of like a Puerto Rican kind of thing going in there. So you get like that Rosie Perez. I don't think so, So you can get very different things all over New York. My favorite is kind of the Brooklyn-y thing because there's something very empowering.
Yeah.
Look, I'm already big, so no one really messes with me, but. If you would go to your day job and somebody messes with you, there's nothing better than going, hey, let me tell you something, pal. I'm going home. I don't want to hear any of this bullshit. I'm getting out of here.
There's something about
it's powerful. It makes you feel like no one's going to mess with you.
And so we find you back here this year doing 3 shows.
Yes.
So, and what's next? When you finish Edinburgh,
I've been doing the last few years. I've been writing screenplays.
Okay.
I have 2 different partners. One named Bess Fanning. We wrote a script called Y2K, all about the Y2K disaster that never happened.
Yeah.
And then I have been working on a few scripts with my writing partner Fabrizio Serioni. What a great film name.
That just says he's in films.
He's from Argentina,
Christ.
but he's Italian from Argentina.
Right.
He cooks the best beef, by the way.
Okay.
But we call him Fab. I Fab.
Okay.
Anyway, so Fab and I are writing screenplays. We wrote one called Brimstone Inc., which is about the office with an office which is literally hell.
Right. Okay.
So when you go to hell, you go to work in this office. That's what hell is.
And it is for a lot. I work in an office.
Yes, no, I have too for
It
years,
is.
and so we decided he worked in an office for many years. I worked both in computers, and we wrote the script called Brimstone Inc. And then we have we have a couple of other ones we're working on, but that's what I'm going back to work on in LA when I get back.
Wonderful. Listen, thank you for talking to us today.
Oh,
and I think
anytime.
I've got to interview you again. We've got to find out more. There's another episode down the way on here.
In a world of danger, only one man could have 2 episodes on the podcast.
And then, where have those voiceover guys? The film trailers have got rid of them now.
I know. I love those. Well, that's because the guy who used to do them, named Tony the Tiger, that was his nickname. He died.
He died. Really?
Passed away. No, the other guy who's doing them though, who does it for G.I. Joe and many things, his name is Brett Ratner.
Okay.
I know him. He's a great guy. He's done Hollywood Fringe a few times. I'm trying to get him to do it over here. But Brett, he's one of the last big voices in LA doing it. But you don't hear it that often anymore now.
And my last final question.
Sure.
And thank you again for today.
No problem.
Is who do you think I should interview for a future episode of Funny Peculiar that I can get hold of, track down? Who would you like?
Okay. I have one name. I just saw a comedian. I mentioned him earlier. I just saw this comedian. His name is Jinx Yo.
Okay.
I think he's from Singapore, maybe originally from China. I saw his act. Great writing. And I think that would be a hoot. I think that would be a good interview. Because I don't know much about him.
Okay.
But I just saw him and I thought, well, I'd like to know more about him. Okay. How did he get into comedy?
How did he do that? Brilliant. I will track him down. Brilliant. Thank you, Craig Shaynak.
Yes.
Am I getting that name
yes,
right?
You got it right.
Ricky.
Ricci.
Hey,
che tu vai? Hey.
Craig Ricci Shaynak. Yes. Thank you very much for being on Funny Peculiar.
It was a pleasure. And you know what? I don't feel that peculiar. But I feel funny.
You've been listening to Funny Peculiar. Tune in next week. More great guests.